Hello and welcome to State of the Economy. Today we have as a special guest Dr. Tarun Das, former Director General of CII, and he's a very well-known name, and for decades he has led Indian industry's engagement with the Indian government as also world governments on very critical policy issues, and he understands the DNA of the Indian industry like possibly no one else does. And so we have him on our show today to talk about where Indian industry stands today in the context of the world economy, the nature of globalization that we are seeing, incrementally economic globalization, trade globalization. So to discuss all that, we have Dr. Tarun Das. Welcome to our show.
Thank you.
So tell us, where is Indian industry today? You have seen the evolution of Indian industry from 1990 onwards, the first phase of liberalization, then Indian companies going global, doing very well. And today we have a situation where there are global headwinds and Indian industry growth has slowed down, exports are negative, going through some difficult times, not just India, many emerging markets. Emerging economies, and Indian industry seems to be a little withdrawn today, looking a bit inward. So how do you read the present situation in the context of the way industry is thinking and in the context of how policy is looking at the economy and the industry?
Venu, is good to be with you. Thank you for having me on the show. A quick snapshot of history.
Yeah.
Pre-1990, an Indian industry uncompetitive, protected, really not efficient.
Yeah.
1991 onwards, deregulation, liberalization process. First pains of competition, apprehension.
Initially reluctance also.
Reluctance, apprehension, conflicts internally within industry.
Yeah.
Go with the liberalization or try to hold it back.
And you dealt with it from very close quarters.
Yes, we dealt with it, and but we went with it.
Yeah.
And we got to 7% GDP growth year on year, 94, 95, 96. It was so suddenly Indian industry found that
it could
there
compete.
it could compete. There was no reason to be scared of competition.
Yeah.
Then 97 came. Southeast Asia financial crisis.
The Asian crisis, yeah.
Growth came down, pain came. Meanwhile, trade and investment had been opened up. Imports started coming in more from China. Again, apprehension, again, concern. Right? And those few years, that 2000, pre-2000, post-2000 were difficult years in Indian industry.
There was a downward business cycle there.
But they used it for restructuring. If you look at the composition of Indian industry today, leadership, in manufacturing especially, there are still many people doing well today who were there at that time. A few have disappeared. But if you look at the totality of Indian industry, it's a pretty good track record. All right? Then we come into the post-2004 period,
the boom
wonderful
period.
time, boom year,
global liquidity,
9% growth, euphoria, India is the center of the world, etc., etc. Crash of 2008. But Indian industry still continued to grow. The last few years, 2012 onwards, there was a slowdown in the world, slowdown in India. I felt that we became defensive again. We got into a little bit of a mindset of, keep the world out. But there was no need, because by this time, Indian industry, as you said, was investing abroad. When you're abroad, you bought companies in America or UK
so you're competing
or Europe
globally.
or Singapore. You're competing globally. There's no protection. It's an absolutely open field, cutthroat competition, and Indian companies are doing really well. And that's a tribute to Indian entrepreneurship in that way. So
why the industry looking so inward today?
Because of the pain. I think it always happens. When there is growth goes down, when there is stagnation, when there is pain, around the world, America became protectionist.
So are you saying that a business down cycle
Always
creates self-doubts?
Creates that, let's protect ourselves, let's keep the world out,
Because what you're saying is so true, because even on the policy front, I hear a lot of murmurs from the Ministry of Commerce, Industry, etc., where people are talking about the negative aspects of various regional trade agreements that we signed, which benefited us earlier.
Absolutely.
So suddenly everything is being viewed through a negative prism.
And those regional trade agreements helped us to increase our exports abroad, big time, It's not as if it was one-way traffic. It helped to increase two-way trade, which is what it was meant to be. So now we find that we are worrying about trade policy. We are worrying about concluding FTAs. We are worrying about what will it mean in terms of more imports. We don't need to. We don't need to be scared anymore. We are much, much stronger. And by the way, the Make in India initiative of the government and the Prime Minister is all about promoting investment. If you cannot...
It's about lowering trade barriers rather than...
If you cannot open ourselves to trade, you're undermining Make in India to me. So Make in India and trade policy and globalization and getting into international trade arrangements is part and parcel of the same thing. They're two sides of the same coin.
In a way, what you're saying is, if you want to make in India, if you want to really push Make in India policy, then you can't have high minimum import price on steel, because the steel users far outnumber steel producers.
Absolutely.
Isn't that what you're saying essentially?
No, absolutely. And we actually have learned to compete. We have learned to compete internationally. So we need to not now start putting up artificial barriers to competition from abroad. And the companies in 1998, who I remember telling me in the CII days, saying, are you selling out India? Why are you pushing liberalization? We will all die. Some of those companies, Venu, today are the most profitable companies in the world, not just in India. They're in profitable. So they have resilience. They have competitiveness. We don't need to have low self-esteem.
One of the reasons, Mr. Das, which makes Indian companies very defensive today, as you said, inward-looking, full of self-doubts, is what people describe as the big disruption which is coming from China, which has built overcapacities and it is slowing. In every commodity sector, China has built 30-40% overcapacity. And so the local entrepreneurs are very scared to get into those areas. And those who have invested probably want to get out, and they've run up huge NPAs with banks, etc. So in this kind of situation, you've been head of CII for more than 35 years, and what should industry do, or what should government do? Should there be to remove these self-doubts within the industry? Should there be a greater communication dialogue between the government, policymakers and the industry, and they move together? Is that something which is happening, which industry association would facilitate normally?
Irrespective of the global slowdown and irrespective of the slowdown in China and USA, let's say, these are the two very large markets, single markets of the world, right? For us. And we actually have a trade balance in our favor with USA, which is not so with China. I think we've got to have a permanent government, industry, academia, media task force, which sits together in a closed room and decides strategy vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis USA. We've got to have our strategy right. They have got their strategy vis-a-vis us. But when we go for our track 2 dialogues and all, they always have their wish list. We need to be much clearer on our wish list. And we must penetrate the Chinese market. And we must give them something, but we must take something on a reciprocal basis. It's got to be two-way traffic. It cannot be one-way traffic, because our pharma exports, our IT exports and other things are being blocked in different ways through non-tariff barriers by China. But we need to be more aggressive, but we need to do a lot more data-based thinking. I want to know who has all the data on Chinese imports.
Yeah.
Where are they importing from?
Yeah.
And what is it that we can substitute and get into the market? Because we've got manufacturing capacity here in different, across the board.
You recently had a closed door interaction with policymakers on how to come up with a cohesive strategy vis-a-vis China to get into the Chinese market. Because unfortunately, China's GDP has doubled since 2007, 2008. Post financial crisis,
Absolutely.
they have gone up from 600,000 or 6 trillion to about 5 trillion to about $10 trillion today. And in PPP terms, they are probably larger than the US. Have we missed that opportunity? In the Chinese growth story, we have not been able to penetrate.
We have not yet penetrated. But you know, what I would like to see.
What is the reason for that?
You see, we need to be all over China.
Yeah.
Indian industry needs to be all over China. Say, if Indian industry is in Shanghai, it's not good enough. Because China is growing in different provinces.
Yeah.
So, have
You need to be in the provinces.
Have we got our footprint in the different provinces, especially those which are economically important? Have we got intelligence of what is going on there? What is our strategy to get into that market, either through trade or investment? So it's a comprehensive thing, it's a process. I don't think we missed the bus. China is huge. That market will continue to be huge in spite of slowdown. We need to give consistent attention to China and have an action plan to deal with China. And we welcome their investment, but we should be aggressive in getting into China as they are aggressive to get into India.
You've been head of CII for so many years. Historically, does the Indian industry have greater apprehension vis-a-vis China and dealing with China as opposed to dealing with the EU or other emerging economies in Latin America, Africa, or the US?
It is so, very much so. But you know why it is?
Why?
Lack of information, lack of knowing what. There is an opaqueness about China to us in industry. But so we need to get into the system. This is why I'm saying we need to have offices, representations all over. We need to learn the language. Thousands of Indian executives need to learn Chinese. How many Indians are learning Mandarin today? You know, many of them are the ones studying medicine in China. But are the business executives learning Mandarin? Are they understanding the culture of China so that we can engage with them more effectively? I think one of the reasons for apprehension is lack of knowledge, lack of information, and that's a difficult society to penetrate. So you've got to get inside. You've got to get inside that bamboo curtain.
What about, say, Europe? Prime Minister is going to Brussels, and I'm told India wants to really revive its free trade agreement, comprehensive FTA talks, encompassing goods, services, everything. Do you expect something to come out or something to happen? Do you think we are defensive there also on free trade?
I think they are also defensive.
They are also defensive
because it's a two-way thing. They basically want lower tariffs on our automotive industry and our other goods and services, particularly wines and spirits, and liquor industry. We want access to European continent for our services and the free movement of people. So there is no agreement on these two. By the way, when they ask
they also want access to our services, right, sector,
they
right?
want
banking, insurance, etc.
They want, but they have a lot of access to banking and insurance already. But they're very restrictive on our services. And one of the things is when they are asking us to reduce our tariffs on products, their companies which are here manufacturing in India are also got reservations about reduction of duty because they're already in the Indian market. They've come in here, they're manufacturing here. They're not supportive of reduction of duties. So it's not just an Indian thing, it is also a multinational thing.
Tell me, how do you view, there are short-term problems which we are facing, the economy is facing. The government is very aware of those problems. Finance Minister Mr. Jaitley had articulated some of those issues. And one key issue which the industry and policymakers both face is the massive burgeoning bad assets loans in the Indian banks. Now, a lot of things are now contingent on fixing that problem, because the RBI says even if it drops interest rates, banks are unable to pass it on, because if you have 10% of your total credit, actually more, some say 14% as bad assets or going bad, how do banks lend? So banks need recapitalization. All those things the government is grappling with. How do you read this situation?
I have very traditional views because these NPAs largely relate to infrastructure projects, which are PPP projects, public-private partnership projects. So it's a partnership between the public sector and the private sector.
You mean the telecom, roads, power sector?
Yeah.
Okay.
What has happened? Many of the private sector companies are over leveraged. In other words, they've taken too much debt.
Yeah.
So if you read in the papers every day, some private sector company in the infrastructure sector is now selling off his shares to somebody or the other to reduce that debt to pay back the bank, which is a very good process, you know, because the banks have got to be paid back. You know, so that process is going on now. I think Finance Ministry, RBI are being tough on these issues, and that you can see the U-turn has been made on these things. So I think this is not a future problem. This is the past problem which is getting corrected. But I feel if you look around the world, if you look at America or Germany and other countries, the best infrastructure was built by the public sector. It was the government which built roads. So it was the government which built
So you're saying we need to take a relook at the PPP?
Why not? Let's take NTPC, National Thermal Power
So are you suggesting the government should take over these projects and implement it?
They can. Well, actually what is happening is many of these projects which are incomplete are getting sold off to private equity firms.
Okay.
So that's also good, because that will mean early implementation. It won't get stuck for money. And then the private equity firm, which has not got a long-term interest in the project, will put the project on stream and then sell it.
I believe this is also happening in the steel sector. The steel secretary last week said on TV that they're getting private equity investors to invest in steel companies, which are currently down because of the business cycle being down. Once it's up.
So this is fine. I mean, we've got to get out of this solution of worrying about not paying the banks back. The banks have got to be paid back. Little worry about recapitalization, because that's money coming from the government exchequer. Where will the money go? Will that good money again go into bad money? We have to be worrying about that. So you have to make sure that good money remains good money. All right? And please give companies like NTPC, NHPC and others who are in the infrastructure sector the authority, the autonomy to set up more power projects, National Highway Authority, and they can outsource, they can subcontract, leave it to, let it be a commercial deal. It's not charity, but go down that route.
To some extent that's happening, because Mr. Gadkari,
I think we've turned around.
Recently said that 70% of the road projects are being done by the government by giving it out to contractors.
That's right. So that's the way to go. I think we will solve this problem and not be wedded to this PPP project. I think that's a problem for us.
So do you see this strategy working and lifting growth a little in the near future?
So far, not yet. But yes, I think this year we will see a turnaround in growth. Some signs are there of turnaround in growth, increase in demand, especially in the infrastructure sector under Mr. Gadkari. I think there is implementation going on, because another issue was implementation of whatever good policies are there. I think there is a very practical approach there in the roads, highways, transport, shipping sector, and that practical approach is showing faster implementation.
And you think that this budget actually puts in place a framework to enable this to happen? Because if you look at GDP growth, 2014-15 was probably 2015-16 is the same as the 2014. There's been no pickup.
No.
And people question the new GDP series also. So going by the old GDP series, we are probably growing at 6.
The real economy is not did not pick
6%.
up. Did not pick up.
So, so do you think public investment-driven strategy will eventually crowd in private investment in the near future or within this fiscal?
But private investment still has a lot of space. And they can go to little smaller projects. They can go to medium-sized projects rather than big projects. So there is a lot of space in India because there's a lot of opportunities for marketing your products.
Then how do you read this problem often cited, which is that industry is currently working at 70% of capacity.
Yeah.
So new investments
even lower,
65, roughly 65. So new investments don't come in, private investments, until capacity
comes to 85,
crosses 85. So this problem will remain, right?
I think this year we may see some new investments coming because I'm seeing some pickup in demand in capital equipment. And if that capital equipment orders, capital goods orders start flowing from the infrastructure sector, it needs to pick up to that 85% and then investments will begin. But I think 2016-17 could be a very critical year.
So how critical is Raghuram Rajan, his cutting interest rates sharply at this stage? How do you read that?
No, I think that has
because the budget, Mr. Jaitley has clearly signaled in the budget that he's trying his best to stick to the fiscal roadmap.
That's a great thing.
And he has further signaled by sharply cutting interest rates on, PPF, etc., on mandatory savings. So do you think that this signal will be accepted by Raghuram? Will he take the bait?
I think the RBI has been amazingly good, by the way. So I'm a supporter of the RBI policies over the last.
Sure, they have maintained macroeconomic stability.
Very important for India when the whole world is going down. All right. So I think all credit to government and RBI for making that happen. Interest rates alone are not going to fuel investment. The earlier point that you mentioned, 85% capacity utilization is which will fuel investment. All right. Then it's a question is what's the borrowing cost? Is it 16%? Is it 14%? Is it 12%? All right? But you have to get to that first before the interest rate benefit kicks in. People are not going to use the interest rate benefit to invest if their capacity utilization is 65%. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, no? Absolutely.
So I don't think we should put all the reliance on interest rates.
So what you're essentially saying is that if indeed demand picks up and capacity crosses 85, people will borrow at the current interest rates.
Absolutely. You increase demand in the economy, investment will come.
Investment will come, And how do you generally read the finance minister's, the other big worry that he has, that rural demand is really down. We have had nearly 0% agriculture growth in the last 2 years. So the budget has done a lot, claims to do a lot for rural India. They are trying to revive Manrega, which was being ridiculed earlier. So do you think all these things will help kick up rural demand also?
I like the budget. Okay, I like the budget. I think there was a comprehensive approach to the economy, and the rural part, the agricultural part, is a very critical part of the economy. I think we will see a growth in the rural economy. Delivery of all that he says in terms of implementation can be a concern, but I think there's a real pressure to
and a good monsoon might help.
Of course, that will help enormously, but I think that rural part is a very essential part, and that will, by the way, benefit everybody across the economy. So I'm so glad that this priority was given in the budget.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tarun Das, for talking to us. That's all we have in this edition of State of the Economy. We'll be back with you next week. Thanks for watching.